Bullies insult the boy in a wheelchair. He calls his mom and 7 armored vehicles show up at the school. Ethan Miller held the phone with trembling hands as he watched the 3 classmates approach him in the empty courtyard of Lincoln Memorial High School in Charleston. The 14-year-old red-headed boy knew exactly what was coming and felt his heart racing in his chest. "Mom, they're doing it again," he whispered into the phone, trying not to draw attention from the boys who had already started laughing and pointing at his wheelchair. Tyler, the leader of the group, was the tallest of the 3 and wore that cruel smile Ethan had learned to fear. Beside him, Brandon and Noah completed the trio that had turned his school life into a daily nightmare. The 3 positioned themselves around the wheelchair, forming a circle that blocked any chance of escape. "Look who we have here," Tyler said, leaning forward. "Our special little friend who needs wheels to get around." Brandon laughed loudly, clapping exaggeratedly. "Dude, it must be so cool to never play ball again, huh? Or run, or even go to the bathroom by yourself." Noah, the youngest of the group at just 13, seemed less comfortable with the situation, but still joined in the taunts. "I bet you can't even climb stairs. What kind of life is that?" Ethan pressed the phone to his ear, waiting to hear his mother's voice on the other end. Sarah Miller, his adoptive mother, was in the middle of military training when she answered her son's call. His voice, filled with fear and anguish, made her stop everything immediately. "Ethan? What's happening, sweetheart?" "They're here again, Mom. They're saying things. About the chair, about me not being able to walk." Sarah felt fury rising in her chest. For 3 months, she had tried to resolve the situation through the school's official channels, talking to the principal, sending letters, requesting meetings. Nothing had worked. Every day, Ethan came home more defeated, more heartbroken, more destroyed inside. "Where exactly are you?" she asked, already walking toward the military vehicles parked on the base grounds. "In the school courtyard near the cafeteria." "Mom, I can't take this anymore. They say I'm dead weight, that I'll never amount to anything." Her son's words cut through Sarah's heart like a blade. She looked around and saw the 7 armored vehicles that had been used in that morning's tactical training. An idea began forming in her mind, one that might be drastic, but could finally put an end to this. "Ethan, listen carefully. Hold on tight and don't let them see you're scared. I'll be there in 15 minutes. "But Mom, you're working—" "Don't worry about that, sweetheart. Just hold on." Sarah hung up and looked at the 7 soldiers who had been training with her. They were all trusted men, family men, who understood the importance of protecting the vulnerable. She made a decision that would change not just that day, but the lives of everyone involved. "Soldiers, I need you to come with me on a special mission. We're going to my son's school. There's a situation that needs to be resolved immediately." Sergeant Thompson, a 50-year-old man with 2 teenage sons, stepped closer to his commander. "Something serious, Colonel Miller?" "Bullying. 3 boys have been tormenting my son for months, and the school has done nothing. Today it ends." The soldiers exchanged glances. They all knew Colonel Sarah Miller was fair, level-headed, and would never abuse her position. If she was taking this step, the situation had gone too far. "Are we taking the armored vehicles?" asked Corporal Wilson. Sarah nodded firmly. "We'll use everything at our disposal. Today, those boys are going to learn a lesson they'll never forget." Meanwhile, at the school, Ethan's situation was worsening by the minute. Tyler had knocked his notebooks to the ground and was now stomping on the pages with satisfaction. "Look at the mess you made, cripple. You'll have to ask someone to help you pick all this up, huh? Because you can't bend down." Brandon grabbed Ethan's backpack and started rummaging through it. "What do we have here? Medicine? Diapers?" He laughed as he scattered the boys' personal belongings across the floor. Noah watched everything with growing discomfort. There was something in Ethan's face, a mix of sadness and resignation that made him feel sick, but the pressure from his friends was too strong for him to muster the courage to intervene. "You know I could outrun all 3 of you before the accident, right?" Ethan said suddenly, catching the bullies off guard. Tyler stopped stomping on the notebooks and looked at him with disdain. "Before the accident? What accident? You were born like this, weren't you?" The question revealed just how little the boys knew about Ethan's life. They tormented him daily but never cared to understand his story, his real struggles, or the circumstances that led to his condition. I was 12 when it happened, Ethan continued, his voice gaining unexpected strength. I was the striker on my old school's soccer team, scored in every game. I was coming back from practice when a car lost control and plowed onto the sidewalk. The three boys fell silent for a few seconds. For the first time, Ethan didn't seem like the helpless victim they were used to seeing. My legs were crushed, but my mind kept working perfectly. That's why I have the best grades in class, why I can solve the math problems you can't, why the history teacher always calls on me for the tough questions. Brandon was clearly unsettled by the turn in the conversation. Stop showing off, man. Everyone knows you only get good grades because the teachers pity you. Is that so? Ethan smiled for the first time that morning. Then explain why I always finish tests first, why my essays are always read as examples to the class, why the principal invited me to represent the school at the state math Olympiad. Tyler was losing control of the situation, and it infuriated him. He didn't like it when his victims fought back, when they showed they had dignity and self-worth. Whatever. You're still a cripple who'll never have a normal life. You'll never date, never have kids, never be truly happy. Tyler's words echoed across the empty schoolyard. Ethan felt tears welling in his eyes, but before they could spill down his face, a distant sound began to grow closer. It was a deep, rhythmic noise that made the ground tremble slightly. "What is that sound?" asked Noah, looking around curiously. The noise grew louder, nearer. It was unmistakably the rumble of heavy engines, multiple vehicles approaching in formation. The four boys stopped talking and focused on the sound intensifying by the second. Suddenly, the school's main gate burst open with a metallic crash. The first military armored vehicle rolled into the schoolyard, its massive tires crushing the gravel of the parking lot. Behind it, 6 more armored vehicles followed in perfect formation, creating a scene straight out of a war movie. The diesel engines roared with intimidating power, and the ground shook under the weight of the 7 military vehicles. Tyler, Brandon, and Noah stood frozen, eyes wide and mouths agape, completely bewildered by what was happening. "Oh my God," Brandon murmured, taking a step back. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. The school principal, Barbara Johnson, a 62-year-old woman who had led the institution for over 20 years, rushed out of her office at the deafening noise. She had never witnessed anything like this in her entire career in public education. "What's going on here?" she shouted, trying to make herself heard over the roar of the engines. From the first armored vehicle, a female figure descended with military agility. Colonel Sarah Miller wore her full combat uniform, gleaming black boots, and her commander's badge prominently displayed on her chest. Her brown hair was tied in a perfect military bun, and her olive-green eyes shone with a determination that made everyone present realize they weren't dealing with an ordinary person. Behind her, 6 soldiers stepped out of their respective vehicles, all in field uniforms, all with the impeccable posture of military personnel on duty. The formation was so precise it looked like an official parade. Sarah walked straight toward the group of boys, her firm footsteps echoing across the now silent courtyard. Tyler, Brandon, and Noah were so terrified they could barely breathe. "Ethan," she said, her voice carrying both warmth and authority. "Are you okay, son?" "I am, Mom. Now I am." The word "Mom" hit the 3 bullies like a bombshell. They finally understood who this imposing woman was and why the military vehicles were there. Principal Johnson approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am, you are—" "Colonel Sarah Miller, commander of the 15th Motorized Infantry Brigade, and this is my son, Ethan Miller." Sarah looked directly at Tyler. "I believe you've already met." Tyler tried to speak, but only a choked sound came out. Brandon had started sweating bullets, and Noah looked like he was about to faint. "Principal," Sarah continued, turning her attention back to the educator, "for 3 months I've been trying to resolve this situation through the proper channels. I sent letters, requested meetings, explained in detail what my son was enduring. Every attempt of mine was ignored or downplayed." Barbara swallowed hard. She vaguely remembered some letters about bullying issues, but had always filed them away without giving them proper attention. In her experience, student conflicts were normal and resolved themselves over time. I don't quite recall. You don't recall? Sarah's voice turned icy. You don't recall a desperate mother begging for help to protect her teenage son who came home crying every day. Sergeant Thompson stepped forward, his military boots clicking sharply against the concrete. Colonel, we've contacted the minors' parents. They're on their way to the school. Sarah nodded. Good, Sergeant. We'll wait for them right here. Tyler finally found his voice, though it came out shaky and much higher than usual. We didn't do anything that bad, it was just a joke. Sarah turned to him with an expression that made the boy stumble back 2 steps. A joke? Calling a child a cripple is a joke. Telling them they'll never have a normal life is a joke. Publicly humiliating someone every day is a joke? I didn't. Do you know bullying is considered a crime in the United States? Sarah pressed, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used to command soldiers. Do you know you can be held criminally responsible for the psychological harm you've caused? Noah started crying. He was the youngest in the group, and clearly the most sensitive to the consequences of his actions. I didn't mean to hurt him, my friends were doing it and Oh, so it was your friends doing it? And you just went along? Sarah looked at him with a mix of seriousness and understanding. How old are you? 13, ma'am. 13. Old enough to know right from wrong. Old enough to choose not to hurt others. Corporal Wilson approached the commander. Colonel, the first guardian has arrived. A plainly dressed woman, clearly nervous, rushed through the school gate. It was Mrs. Betty, Noah's mother, a seamstress who worked from home to support her 3 children alone. When she saw the military armored vehicles and her son crying surrounded by soldiers, her legs nearly gave out. Noah! Oh my God, Noah, what did you do? She shouted, running toward her son. Sarah watched the interaction between mother and son closely. Mrs. Betty clearly loved Noah, but was also terrified by the situation. It was obvious she had no idea what her son had been doing at school. Are you Noah's mother? Sarah asked, softening her tone slightly. Yes, ma'am, please tell me what's going on. They called saying it was urgent that my son was involved in something serious at school. Your son, along with 2 classmates, has been systematically bullying my son for at least 3 months. Today, I decided this stops. Mrs. Betty looked at Noah with shock and disappointment. Noah, is this true? The boy couldn't stop crying. Mom, I didn't mean to. They said if I didn't join in, they'd do the same to me. Noah's confession revealed a deeper layer to the situation. In a way, he was also a victim of the power dynamic Tyler had established in the group. Sarah knelt in front of Noah, meeting his eyes. Noah, look at me. Are you saying they threatened you? Yeah. Tyler said if I didn't help mess with Ethan, he'd tell everyone I wear hand-me-downs, that my mum can't afford new things. Mrs. Betty felt her heart break. She worked 16-hour days to give her children the bare minimum of dignity, and learning that Noah was ashamed of their financial situation devastated her. Sweetheart, why didn't you ever tell me? Because I was embarrassed, Mum. All the other boys at school have brand-name sneakers, new clothes, expensive phones. I didn't want them to know we're poor. Sarah realized she was dealing with a far more complex situation than she'd initially thought. This wasn't just a simple case of bullying, but a tangled web of social, family, and emotional issues. Another car pulled up outside the school. It was an old white Chevy, dented and faded. A man in his 40s stepped out, wearing a mechanic's uniform, his hands still dirty with grease. It was Mike Roberts, Brandon's father. "Brandon!" he yelled, visibly angry. "What the hell did you do this time?" Mike Roberts had worked in an auto shop since he was 15. He'd built an honest but hard life and had little time to closely monitor his son's upbringing. Brandon spent most of his time alone at home or on the streets, forming his own values and codes of behavior. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what?" "You drag me out of work in the middle of the morning in front of my co-workers, embarrass me. For what? To find out you've been picking on other kids?" Sarah observed the dynamic between father and son. Mike clearly cared about Brandon, but there was an emotional distance between them. a communication gap that likely contributed to the boy's behavioral issues. "Mr. Mike, isn't that right?" Sarah addressed Brandon's father. "Has your son been telling you about his activities at school?" Mike ran a hand through his sweaty hair. "Look, Mom, I work all day to put food on the table. I come home tired. He says everything's fine at school. I trust him. Now you're telling me he's been doing something wrong? Your son, along with his friends, has been systematically bullying a child with a physical disability. Today, that stops." The information hit Mike like a punch to the gut. He looked at Brandon with a mix of anger and shame the boy had never seen before. "Brandon, look at me. Did you really do this?" Brandon tried to downplay the situation. "Dad, it wasn't like that. We were just playing with him." "Playing? Playing what? Humiliating someone who can't defend themselves?" Mike's voice grew louder and more intense. Other soldiers discreetly moved closer, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. "Mr. Mike," Sarah stepped in, "I understand your anger, but right now we need to think about solutions, not just punishments." "Solutions? What kind of solutions?" "Let's wait for the third boy's father to arrive, and then we'll discuss it." As if summoned, a brand new black Lexus pulled into the school parking lot. It stood in stark contrast to the other cars present. Out stepped a man in a suit, speaking loudly on his phone, clearly annoyed at being interrupted during his workday. It was Mr. Richard Anderson, Tyler's father, a successful lawyer working at a firm in downtown Charlotte. He ended the call and walked toward the group with an impatient expression. "What's the meaning of this urgent summons? I have an important hearing in 2 hours." Sarah studied Mr. Anderson carefully. Everything about him exuded privilege and authority. The expensive suit, the gold watch, the confident posture. He was clearly a man accustomed to controlling situations and solving problems through influence and money. "Mr. Anderson, I presume?" Sarah extended her hand. "Colonel Sarah Miller, commander of the 15th Motorized Infantry Brigade." Mr. Anderson shook her hand firmly, but his gaze was assessing the situation, trying to figure out the best strategy to leave as quickly as possible. "Pleasure, Colonel. Now, can you explain why my son was involved in this military display?" "Your son Tyler is the leader of a group that's been systematically bullying my son Ethan. Today, that ends." Mr. Anderson looked at Tyler with an expression mixing surprise and irritation. "Tyler, is this true?" Tyler, who had remained relatively calm until then, saw an opportunity to use his father's influence to get out of the situation. "Dad, this is a total exaggeration. We were just playing with the kid in the wheelchair. His mom brought the whole army here to intimidate us." Tyler's response revealed much about his personality and upbringing. He showed no remorse or understanding of the gravity of his actions. Instead, he tried to downplay the bullying and portray himself as the victim. Mr. Anderson sighed heavily. "Colonel, I understand you're concerned about your son, but do you believe this military display is proportional to the situation? We're talking about children, about kids' games." Sarah felt anger rising within her, but maintained her professional composure. "Kids' games, Mr. Anderson. Let me read you some of the things your son said to mine this morning." She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, where she had written down everything Ethan had reported during the phone call. "You're a cripple who'll never have a normal life. You'll never date, never have kids, never truly be happy. These are your son's childish jokes." The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Anderson looked at Tyler with an expression the boy couldn't decipher. For the first time, Tyler began to realize he might have gotten himself into something bigger than he could handle. "Tyler, did you really say that?" "Dad, I was angry. He acts all high and mighty just because he gets good grades." "Answer the question. Did you say these things?" Tyler lowered his head. "I did." Mr. Anderson closed his eyes for a few seconds, running his hand over his face. When he opened them again, there was something different in his expression. "Colonel Miller, I apologize for my son's behavior. This is unforgivable." Sarah nodded but kept her stance firm. "Thank you for acknowledging it, Mr. Anderson, but now we need to talk about consequences and solutions." Principal Johnson, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, finally gathered the courage to speak. Perhaps we could handle this internally with suspensions, warnings. No, Sarah interrupted firmly. 3 months of attempts at internal resolution were ignored. Now we'll do things differently. Sergeant Thompson stepped closer to the commander. Colonel, how would you like to proceed? Sarah looked at the 3 boys, then at the parents, and finally at Ethan, who had stayed silent during the entire confrontation. Ethan, what do you think should happen now? The question surprised everyone present. No one expected the victim to be consulted about the consequences for the bullies. Ethan was silent for a few moments, carefully considering his answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured. I don't think they understand what they've done, Mom. They don't know what it's like to live with my condition, the struggles I face every day. Maybe if they knew... What are you suggesting, son? That they learn, really learn, that they experience some of what I go through every day. Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at the school. Her son, even after months of suffering, was showing a maturity and wisdom that made her proud. Mr. Anderson, Mr. Roberts, Mrs. Betty, she addressed the 3 parents. I have a proposal for you. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. There's a special program at our military base designed for youth with behavioral issues. It's a 3-month course where they learn discipline, responsibility, teamwork, and most importantly, empathy. Mr. Anderson shook his head immediately. I won't allow my son to be treated like a juvenile delinquent. It's not a program for delinquents, sir. It's an educational program, voluntary. But if you prefer, I can file a formal report and let the justice system handle it. The veiled threat made Mr. Anderson reconsider. He knew a bullying lawsuit could permanently stain Tyler's record and affect his future educational opportunities. Mike Roberts was the first to speak up. If this will teach my son not to mistreat others, I accept. Mrs. Betty nodded timidly. If you think it'll help Noah, I accept too. Mr. Anderson was clearly conflicted. On one hand, he didn't want Tyler subjected to a military program. On the other, he understood it was better to accept the colonel's proposal than face legal consequences. And if I refuse, Sarah looked him straight in the eyes, then I'll file a formal report for bullying, unlawful harassment, and emotional distress. I'll also pursue a civil lawsuit for the psychological damage caused to my son. Are you familiar with anti-bullying legislation, Mr. Anderson? Mr. Richard Anderson knew exactly what the legal implications were. The National Anti-Bullying Act criminalized bullying, and the consequences could be severe for minors and their guardians. 3 months? 3 months, every Saturday from 8 in the morning to 5 in the evening. Transportation provided by the base, meals included, no cost to the families. And what exactly will they do there? Sarah smiled again. They'll learn teamwork, participate in obstacle course challenges, study diversity and inclusion, and have hands-on lessons about living with different types of physical limitations. Hands-on lessons? Yes. They'll spend hours in wheelchairs, wearing blindfolds, using crutches. They'll experience firsthand some of the difficulties people like my son face every day. Tyler paled at the description. The thought of spending hours in a wheelchair terrified him. This isn't fair, he protested. We didn't do anything to end up crippled. The silence that followed Tyler's comment was deafening. Even Mr. Anderson was shocked by his son's insensitivity. Sarah stepped closer to Tyler, her voice firm enough to make the boy tremble. Crippled? That's the word you use to describe people with disabilities? I didn't mean you meant exactly that. And you know what, Tyler? My son isn't crippled. He's a person with a physical disability who has more courage, intelligence, and character than you've shown in your entire life. Mr. Anderson quickly intervened. Colonel, I accept the proposal. Tyler will participate in the program for the full 3 months. Dad, Tyler protested. Quiet, Mr. Anderson said, with an authority his son rarely heard. You will attend this program and you will learn to be a better person. And when you come home, we're going to have a long talk about values and respect. Sarah nodded in satisfaction. Good. The program starts this Saturday. You'll receive all necessary information by Thursday. Principal Johnson approached hesitantly. Colonel, what about the school? How should we proceed here? The school will immediately implement an effective anti-bullying program. I want a detailed plan on my desk by Friday, including protocols for identifying, intervening, and monitoring bullying cases. But that requires resources, training. Then get the resources and training. Or would you prefer I report to the Department of Education how this institution has neglected students' emotional safety? Principal Johnson nodded quickly. She knew she had no choice but to agree to all of the Colonel's demands. Sarah glanced at her wristwatch. Soldiers, prepare the vehicles for return to base. Our mission here is complete. The 7 soldiers moved with military efficiency, readying the armored vehicles for departure. The sound of engines starting up made the entire school courtyard vibrate. Ethan, Sarah approached her son. How do you feel now? Much better, Mom. A lot better. Good. Now let's go home. You have math homework to do. Ethan smiled. It was amazing how a problem that seemed unsolvable had been resolved in less than an hour. He looked at Tyler, Brandon, and Noah, who were still processing everything that had happened. See you Monday at school, he said to the 3 of them. I hope we can start over, maybe even become real friends. Ethan's generosity, after all he had endured, left the 3 bullies completely stunned. They expected anger, revenge, but found forgiveness and a chance at redemption. The armored vehicles began leaving the school in formation, creating a scene that would be remembered by all the students and staff for years to come. It was a practical demonstration that bullying would not be tolerated and that there would always be someone willing to protect the most vulnerable. Mr. Anderson approached Sarah before she entered the last vehicle. Colonel, I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For showing me the kind of person my son was becoming, for giving me the chance to fix it before it was too late. Sarah nodded respectfully. Mr. Anderson, we all make mistakes raising our children. What matters is recognizing when something is wrong and having the courage to change. Will the program really help? I'm absolutely certain of it. In 3 months, you'll have a son you can truly be proud of again. Mr. Anderson extended his hand once more. Thank you so much, Colonel Miller. You're welcome, Doctor. See you Saturday. Sarah entered the armored vehicle, and the military convoy left the school, leaving behind a heavy silence filled with reflection and the promise of profound changes in the lives of everyone involved. Principal Johnson stood still in the middle of the courtyard, watching the last vehicles disappear over the horizon. She knew that day marked the end of an era at the school and the beginning of something entirely new. Secretary, she called out, cancel all my appointments this afternoon. We have an anti-bullying program to develop. Meanwhile, the 3 boys were taken home by their respective parents, each dealing differently with the consequences of their actions and the prospect of the military program awaiting them. Tyler spent the rest of the day locked in his room, alternating between anger and fear of what was to come. He had grown accustomed to using his father's influence to escape the consequences of his actions, but this time would be different. Brandon arrived home to find his mother, Mrs. Rose, waiting to talk about what had happened. Mike had called her and told her everything, and now the family had to face a reality they had ignored for far too long. Noah spent the rest of the day talking with Mrs. Betty about bullying, social pressure, and the difference between right and wrong. It was a difficult but necessary conversation, bringing mother and son closer in a way they hadn't been in years. Ethan got home and went straight to his computer to research the military program he had suggested for his classmates. He was curious to know exactly what they would face over the next 3 months. Sarah spent the rest of the day organizing the details of the special program she had promised. She knew she only had a week to structure something that could truly transform the lives of those 3 boys. At the military base, news of the intervention at the school spread quickly among the soldiers. Many of them were parents and understood their commander's actions perfectly. Some even volunteered to help with the educational program. Sergeant Thompson sought Sarah out in her office at the end of the day. Colonel, may I speak with you? Of course, Sergeant, come in. Ma'am, I just wanted to say what you did today was inspiring. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I know how hard it is to protect our kids from the world's problems. Sarah smiled wearily. Thank you, Sergeant. But now comes the hard part, making sure this program actually works. You can count on me to help. I have experience with troubled teens. I worked at a social project for 2 years before joining the army. Great. We'll need all the help we can get. Meanwhile, in town, news of what had happened at the school began to spread. Charleston was a small town where everyone knew everyone, and a military intervention at a school was something that wouldn't go unnoticed. Mr. Anderson came home that night with his head full of thoughts. His wife, Jennifer, was waiting to find out what had happened. How was it at school? Why did it take so long? Jennifer, we need to talk. About Tyler, about how we're raising our son. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest in the couple's life. Mr. Anderson recounted everything that had happened at school, including the words Tyler had said to Ethan. Jennifer was shocked to discover their son had become a bully. How did we not notice this before? She asked, tears in her eyes. Because we were too busy with our own lives, because we assumed having money and giving him material things would be enough. And now? Now he's going to be part of this military program, and we're going to learn to be better parents. At Mike Roberts' house, the situation was different but equally tense. Brandon was sitting in the kitchen, watching his father silently prepare dinner. The man was clearly shaken by everything he'd learned about his son's behavior. Dad? Go ahead, Brandon. I didn't mean to hurt the boy. I didn't want them to do to me what they did to him. Mike stopped stirring the food and looked at his son. Brandon, do you think that's how things work? Hurting others to protect yourself? I don't know, Dad. School is hard. If you're not strong, they walk all over you. Being strong doesn't mean hurting those who are weaker, son. Being strong means protecting those who need protection. How am I supposed to do that when I need protection myself? Brandon's question revealed a vulnerability Mike hadn't noticed before. His son was also suffering at school, also feeling insecure and threatened. From now on, we'll talk more, okay? Every day when I get home from work, you'll tell me how your day at school was, and if anyone's bothering you, we'll handle it together. Promise, Dad? I promise, son. At Mrs. Betty's house, the conversation with Noah was uncovering even deeper layers of the problem. The boy had confessed he felt inferior to his classmates because of his family's financial situation, and that joining in the bullying against Ethan was a way to divert attention from his own vulnerabilities. My son, you know I do everything I can to give you the best, right? I know, Mom. But it's hard being the only one in class who doesn't have brand-name sneakers, a new phone, or goes on vacation. Noah, look at me. A person's worth isn't in the things they have, it's in their character, their kindness, how they treat others. But at school, it's not like that, Mom. There, the ones who have more stuff get more respect. Then it's time to change that, don't you think? Noah was silent for a moment. Mom, do you think I can really be Ethan's friend after everything I did? Son, it's never too late to start over, to do the right thing. I want to try, Mom. I want to be a better person. Mrs. Betty hugged her son, tears in her eyes. You're already a good person, Noah. You just lost your way for a while. But now, we'll find our way back. Meanwhile, Ethan was at home helping Sarah prepare dinner. It was a routine they'd developed since she adopted him 2 years earlier. Cooking together was a time for conversation and connection between mother and son. Mom, do you think they'll really change? I think it's up to them, son. We can offer opportunities, but the change has to come from within each of them. I hope so. I'd like to have real friends at school. Sarah stopped chopping vegetables and looked at Ethan. Son, you're an amazing person. Anyone would be lucky to be your friend. Sometimes I feel lonely, Mom, not just because of the wheelchair, but because it seems like no one wants to really get to know me. That will change, Ethan. I'm sure of it. How can you be so sure? Sarah smiled and pointed to the military badge on her shirt. Because I never give up, and neither will you. That night, the whole town of Charleston was talking about what had happened at the school. In bars, supermarkets, and town squares, people were discussing the mother who had brought in military armored vehicles to protect her son from bullying. Opinions were divided. Some thought Sarah had gone too far, that she had misused her military position. Others applauded her actions. saying that's exactly how you protect a child. Principal Barbara Johnson stayed up all night working on the anti-bullying plan Sarah had demanded. She researched similar cases, prevention strategies, and intervention protocols. For the first time in years, she was genuinely concerned about the students' emotional well-being. At the military base, Sarah also worked late, planning every detail of the program she had promised. She knew she only had one chance to make this work and couldn't afford to fail. The program would be divided into several phases. First, the boys would undergo psychological evaluations to understand the roots of their aggressive behavior. Then, they'd participate in empathy exercises, experiencing different physical limitations. Next, they'd work on community projects, helping people with disabilities. Finally, they'd develop their own bullying prevention project. Sarah also decided Ethan would take part in some of the program's activities, not as a victim, but as an instructor and an example of resilience. She believed direct contact with him would be key to transforming the three boys. The following Friday, the day before the program began, Sarah received 3 calls. The first was from Mr. Richard Anderson. "Colonel Miller, Tyler is nervous but determined to participate. We talked a lot this week, and I think he's starting to understand the seriousness of what he did." The second was from Mike Roberts. "Mrs. Miller, Brandon is anxious but says he wants to do the right thing. Thank you for giving my son this chance." The third was from Mrs. Betty. "Colonel Miller, Noah won't stop talking about the program. He's excited to start. I think he really wants to change." Sarah was pleased with the calls. The 3 boys seemed to be taking the situation seriously, which was a good sign for the program's success. Saturday morning at 7:30, a military bus stopped in front of the 3 boys' homes to pick them up. Tyler boarded with a serious expression, dressed simply as instructed. Brandon looked nervous, but determined. Noah was clearly anxious, but also hopeful. The bus then headed to Ethan's house, the last stop. When he appeared at the door, helped by Sarah to board the bus in his wheelchair, the 3 bullies visibly tensed. "Good morning," Ethan said with a genuine smile. "Ready to get started?" The 3 mumbled awkward greetings. Ethan's presence on the same bus created a palpable tension, but also an opportunity for them to start seeing him as a real person, not just a target for their cruelty. The trip to the military base took 40 minutes. Along the way, Ethan tried to start conversations, but the boys were still too uncomfortable to respond properly. When they arrived at the base, they were greeted by Sergeant Thompson and 2 other instructors. Sarah was present, but had decided to keep a lower profile during the activities, letting the instructors lead the program. "Welcome to the 15th Brigade Personal and Social Development Program," said Sergeant Thompson. "Over the next 3 months, you'll participate in activities that will challenge not just your bodies, but, most importantly, your minds and hearts." Tyler raised his hand. "Sergeant, is Ethan going to participate in everything too?" "Ethan will be your instructor for some activities. He understands better than any of us the challenges people with disabilities face every day." Brandon looked confused. "But how can he be our instructor if he what, soldier?" The sergeant's voice grew firmer. "If he, well, has limitations. Ethan has physical limitations, not cognitive ones. In fact, he's probably smarter and more determined than any of you. And during this program, you'll learn that firsthand." Noah spoke up for the first time. "Sergeant, can we apologize to him?" "You can, but words are easy. Actions are hard. During this program, you'll prove through your actions that you've truly changed." The first activity of the day was a basic physical assessment. The 3 boys went through coordination, strength, and endurance tests to establish a baseline for measuring their progress. Next came the first empathy exercise. Each boy was placed in a wheelchair and challenged to complete an obstacle course, simulating the daily struggles faced by people with mobility limitations. Tyler was the first to try. He had assumed it would be easy, but soon discovered even simple tasks like going up a ramp or passing through a narrow door were much harder than he imagined. "This is impossible," he exclaimed, after struggling for 15 minutes to get through a door that was perfectly navigable for walking people. Ethan approached him. "Tyler, want me to show you how it's done?" Tyler hesitated for a moment. his pride battling his practical need for help. Okay. Ethan demonstrated the right technique for maneuvering the wheelchair through the door, patiently explaining each movement. Tyler watched closely and managed to repeat it on his second try. "How did you learn to do this so well?" Tyler asked. "Practice. 2 years of daily practice. At first I thought everything was impossible too." Brandon was next to attempt the course. He was more determined than Tyler but still faced significant difficulties. By the time he finished, he was sweating and out of breath. "Ethan, you do this every day." "Every day, Brandon. To go to school, to come home, to shop, to see the doctor every day." Noah was last to try. He was visibly nervous, but also determined to do better than the others. Surprisingly, he completed the course faster, asking for help when needed instead of trying to do everything alone. "Well done, Noah," said Ethan. "You understood that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. Learned that from my mum. She always says there's no shame in accepting help when we need it." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. After the wheelchair exercise, the boys were taken to a room where they met other young people with different disabilities. There were people with visual impairments, hearing loss, amputations, and cerebral palsy. All were volunteers who had agreed to participate in the program to share their experiences. Amanda Taylor, a young woman of 22 who had lost her sight at 16 due to a degenerative disease, was the first to speak. "Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Taylor, and I lost my vision 6 years ago. When I heard you were participating in this program, I wanted to come here to share a bit of my story." Tyler, Brandon, and Noah listened quietly as Amanda recounted how difficult it had been to accept her new condition, how she had faced prejudice and passion, but also how she had discovered new ways to be happy and productive. "What hurt me the most wasn't being unable to see," she explained. "It was how people treated me. Some spoke to me as if I were a child, others ignored me completely. But the worst were those who made cruel remarks, thinking I wouldn't notice." Brandon raised his hand timidly. "Amanda, how did you overcome that?" "First, by accepting that there are ignorant people in the world, but that they don't define who I am. Second, by finding people who saw me for who I truly am, an intelligent, capable person who just needs a few adaptations to do the same things everyone else does." Noah asked, "Did you ever feel like hurting the people who mistreated you?" Amanda smiled. "Of course I did. I'm human. But I learned that the best revenge is to be successful, to be happy, to show them they were completely wrong about my abilities." The conversation continued for another hour, with each of the volunteers sharing their stories and answering the boys' questions. Tyler, Brandon, and Noah began to realize that people with disabilities weren't different or inferior. They were just people facing specific challenges, but with the same dreams, desires, and abilities as anyone else. Charlie, a 19-year-old who had lost his left leg in a motorcycle accident, caught the boys' attention when he mentioned he still played soccer in a special league. "Do you think I play worse than you, just because I have a prosthetic leg?" he asked with a teasing smile. Tyler, who considered himself a good soccer player, answered without thinking, "Of course you do. How about a match then? Me and Ethan against you three. Do you accept the challenge?" Brandon and Noah looked at Tyler, expecting him to refuse, but the boy, still carrying his natural arrogance, accepted the challenge. "Deal, but when we win, you have to admit that—" "Admit what, Tyler?" Ethan interrupted. Tyler realized he was about to say something offensive again. He stopped, took a deep breath, and rephrased, "Nothing, let's just play." The soccer match was an eye-opener for the three boys. Charlie and Ethan played with such coordination and strategy that it left the tough guys completely baffled. Ethan used his wheelchair with impressive skill, making precise passes and defending the goal effectively. Charlie ran and kicked with an agility that made his prosthetic leg seem irrelevant. In 15 minutes of play, Charlie and Ethan had already scored 3 goals, while Tyler, Brandon, and Noah hadn't even come close to the opposing goal. "How do you do that?" asked Brandon, panting and sweaty. "Practice, determination, and teamwork, Charlie replied. The same things any team needs to play well. But you have limitations. Ethan stopped playing and looked straight at Brandon. Brandon, what are your limitations? My limitations? I don't have any. Everyone has limitations. Are you good at math? Not really. What about music? Not that either. Foreign languages? I don't know any. So you have intellectual limitations. Does that make you less valuable? Brandon fell silent, processing what Ethan had said. For the first time, he began to understand that having limitations was something normal, universal, and that the problem wasn't the limitations themselves, but how society treated people with visible limitations. Noah moved closer to Ethan. Ethan, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you ever feel sad about not being able to walk? Ethan thought for a moment before answering. Sometimes, Noah. Especially when I see people running on the beach or when I want to grab something from a high shelf. But most of the time, no. I'm happy with who I am, with my life, with the things I can do. But wouldn't it be better if you could walk? It would be different, Noah. Not necessarily better. If I could walk, maybe I wouldn't have developed other skills I have today. Maybe I wouldn't be as good at math. Maybe I wouldn't have learned to be so patient. Maybe I wouldn't have met the amazing people I've met because of my condition. Tyler joined the conversation. Ethan, do you forgive me for the things I said? I already have, Tyler. But the important question isn't whether I forgive you. The question is, do you forgive yourself? What do you mean? Do you forgive yourself for becoming someone who hurts others? Can you look in the mirror and like the person you see? Tyler was visibly shaken by the question. Over the past few days, since the incident at school, he had thought a lot about his actions and the kind of person he had become. The honest answer was that he didn't like himself. No, he admitted, tears in his eyes. I don't like who I've become. I don't know when I started being a bad person. Ethan moved closer to Tyler. You're not a bad person, Tyler. You're a good person who did bad things. There's a big difference between those two. How can you be so sure? Because truly bad people don't feel bad when they hurt others. You're here in this program because you feel guilty about what you did. That shows there's goodness inside you. The conversation was interrupted by Sergeant Thompson, who called the boys for the next activity. At lunch, they sat together for the first time since they'd met, talking civilly about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Tyler admitted he felt pressured by his father to always be the best at everything and that hurting Ethan was a twisted way to feel superior and in control. Brandon revealed he was afraid to show vulnerability because he thought it would make him a target for bullies, just like his older brother did at home. Noah confessed he joined in the bullying out of fear of rejection from his peers and always felt guilty afterward but didn't know how to stop. Ethan listened to all their confessions with patience and understanding, offering insights that helped the three boys better understand their own motivations. You know you can be friends without needing a common enemy, right? He said during dessert. What do you mean? Brandon asked. You came together to mistreat me, but real friendship doesn't need that. You can come together to do good things, to help each other, to grow together. Noah nodded eagerly. I've always wanted real friends. Friends who care about me for who I am, not what I have. You can be those friends for each other, Ethan said, and you can include others too. Friendship isn't a limited resource. The afternoon was dedicated to teamwork exercises. The four boys were split into mixed groups with other kids and had to solve complex problems that required cooperation, communication, and mutual respect. Tyler, who was used to dominating and controlling situations, struggled at first to work as part of a team. But gradually, he learned to listen to others, to value ideas different from his own, to share leadership. Brandon discovered he had a natural talent for mediating conflicts and finding creative solutions to problems. For the first time, he felt valued for something positive he could contribute. Noah proved to be an excellent organizer, capable of coordinating the group's activities and ensuring everyone participated equally. His experience as the eldest child in a family with limited resources had taught him to maximize resources and include everyone. Ethan, in turn, demonstrated an impressive ability for strategic analysis and long-term planning. His physical limitations had taught him to think several moves ahead, a skill that proved valuable in the exercises. By the end of the first day, the four boys were exhausted but visibly changed. Hostility had been replaced by mutual curiosity and growing respect. Sergeant Thompson gathered the group for a final reflection. "How do you feel about today?" Tyler was the first to speak. "I feel different. Like I learned things about myself I didn't know." Brandon agreed. "I'd never thought about what it's like to live with a disability. Today I realized it's much harder than I imagined, but also that people who live this way are much stronger than I thought." Noah was clearly emotional. "I feel hopeful. I feel like I can be a better person, that I can have real friends." Ethan smiled. "I'm proud of all of you. I know this is just the first day, but you've already shown so much courage to look inside yourselves and want to change." "And you, Ethan?" asked the sergeant. "How do you feel about working with them?" "I've always believed people can change, Sergeant. Today I saw it happening. I'm excited to see where we'll go in the coming months." The bus ride home was much more relaxed than the morning one. There were lively conversations, some laughter, even plans to meet up during the week to study together. When Tyler got home, his parents were waiting to hear about his day. "It was educational," he said. "I learned a lot about myself that I didn't know." Mr. Anderson moved closer to his son. "What kind of things?" "That I became a cruel person because I was afraid of not being good enough, that hurting others doesn't make me stronger, that Ethan is one of the bravest people I've ever met." Jennifer hugged her son. "I'm proud of you for recognizing that, Tyler. It shows you're growing." "Mom, Dad, I want to apologize to you too. I know you always tried to teach me good values and I ignored them. I want to be the son you deserve to have." Mr. Anderson felt tears in his eyes. "You already are, Tyler. You always were. You just lost your way for a while." At Brandon's house, the conversation was just as emotional. Mike was waiting in the living room, eager to hear about his son's day. "How was it, son?" "Dad, I realized something important today. I hurt Ethan because I was afraid of being hurt, but now I know I can protect myself without hurting others." "How?" "By having real friends, people who care about me and who I care about. Today, for the first time, I felt like I could have that." Mike hugged his son. "Brandon, I promise I'll be more present in your life. I'll help you build those friendships to become the good person I know you are." At Mrs. Betty's house, Noah could barely contain his excitement. "Mom, it was the best day of my life. Best. I made real friends, learned amazing things, and discovered I can be someone who makes a difference in others' lives." "Tell me everything, son." Noah recounted every detail of the day, from the wheelchair exercises to the deep conversations with Ethan and the other boys. Mrs. Betty listened with tears of joy in her eyes. "Mom, I want to stay friends with Ethan, Tyler, and Brandon even after the program ends. I want us to become a group that helps others, that fights against bullying." "That's wonderful, Noah. I'm so proud of you." At Ethan and Sarah's house, the conversation was just as positive. "How was it being an instructor for a day?" Sarah asked. "It was amazing, Mom. Seeing them change, understand, grow. It was like watching flowers bloom." "You're not angry with them?" "No, Mom. I feel sorry for how they were feeling before, for what led them to act that way. But now I see they can be incredible people." Sarah hugged her son. "You surprise me every day, Ethan. Your ability to forgive, to see the good in people, is inspiring. I learned it from you, Mom. You taught me everyone deserves a second chance." The following weeks settled into a routine. Every Saturday, the four boys met at the military base to participate in the program's activities. Between meetings, they started seeing each other during the week, studying together, talking, building a genuine friendship. At school, the change was remarkable. Tyler, who had once been feared by his classmates, began using his natural leadership to protect more vulnerable students. Brandon discovered a talent for mediating conflicts and became someone others turned to when they had problems. Noah proved to be an excellent organizer of inclusive activities that brought the whole class together. Ethan, meanwhile, flourished socially. For the first time since his accident, he had a solid group of friends who valued him for who he was, not out of pity or obligation. Principal Johnson implemented the anti-bullying program she had promised, with the help of the 4 boys as advisors. They shared their experiences, both as victims and aggressors, helping to create more effective prevention and intervention strategies. By the 2nd month of the military program, the boys were challenged to develop their own community project. They decided to create a support group for young people with disabilities and their families, offering inclusive activities, emotional support, and advocacy for rights. The project grew beyond their expectations. Within weeks, they had over 20 participants, including youth with different disabilities and their siblings and friends. The activities took place on Sundays at the school, with support from the administration and parents. Tyler turned out to be an excellent fundraiser, using his father's connections to secure donations of equipment and supplies. Brandon became the coordinator of adapted sports activities. Noah organized social events and awareness campaigns. Ethan served as the group's mentor and counselor, offering emotional support and practical guidance. The families of the 4 boys also grew closer during this time. Mr. Anderson and Jennifer became more involved in the group's activities, providing legal and administrative support. Mike Roberts contributed maintenance and transportation services. Mrs. Betty helped with food and event planning. Sarah watched everything with growing pride. The program had exceeded her most optimistic expectations. Not only had the 3 bullies completely changed, but the entire community around them had been transformed. By the 3rd month, it was time for the final presentation. Each program participant had to present an individual project about what they had learned and how they planned to apply those lessons in the future. Tyler chose to speak about positive leadership. He explained how he had learned the difference between dominating and leading, between controlling and inspiring. His project was to create a group of young leaders who would work to promote inclusion and respect in all schools across the region. Brandon presented on conflict resolution and mediation. He had discovered a passion for helping others find peaceful solutions to their problems. His plan was to study psychology and specialize in family and school mediation. Noah spoke about community organizing and social activism. He had realized that his life experience growing up in a low-income family gave him a unique perspective on inequality and social justice. He wanted to work with organizations fighting for the rights of people with disabilities. Ethan presented on inclusive education and advocacy. His experience both as a bullying victim and as a mentor to other young people had shown him the importance of creating truly inclusive environments. He wanted to become a teacher and specialize in special education. The presentations were attended by their families, military instructors, Principal Johnson, and other educators from the area. By the end, there wasn't a single person in the audience who wasn't moved by the transformation they had witnessed. Sergeant Thompson gave the closing speech. 3 months ago, we welcomed here 3 boys who had lost their way, who were hurting others because they themselves were hurting. Today, I see 4 young leaders who will make a difference in the world. Sarah stepped up to the microphone. I'd like to thank everyone who made this program possible. But most of all, I want to thank my son Ethan, who taught me that the best way to fight cruelty is with compassion, and that the best revenge is turning enemies into friends. Mr. Anderson asked to speak. Colonel Miller, when you arrived at the school that day with the armored vehicles, I thought it was excessive. Now I understand it was exactly what my son needed. Thank you for not giving up on him, for believing he could change. Mike Roberts also spoke up. My son was losing himself, and I didn't even notice. This program didn't just save Brandon, it taught me to be a better father. Thank you all. Mrs. Betty, with tears in her eyes, said, My Noah has always been a good boy, but he was being influenced by fear and insecurity. Today, he's a confident young leader who wants to do good in the world. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. But the most emotional moment came when Tyler asked to speak again. Ethan, there's something I want to say to you in front of everyone. On the first day we met, I said terrible things about your future. I said you'd never be happy, never have friends, never make a difference in the world. I was completely wrong about everything. Tyler paused to breathe, visibly emotional. You're the happiest person I know. You have the best friends anyone could ask for, and now I'm proud to be one of them. And you've already made more of a difference in the world at 14 than I ever thought possible. When I grow up, I want to be half the person you already are. I want to have your courage, your wisdom, your ability to forgive. You're not just my friend, Ethan, you're my hero." The silence that followed was deep and heavy with emotion. There wasn't a single person present who wasn't touched by Tyler's words. Ethan stepped forward and offered him a heartfelt hug. "Tyler, you're already an amazing person. You just needed to realize it. I'm proud of the man you're becoming." The four boys embraced at the center of the stage, symbolizing a transformation that had begun with pain and conflict, but had blossomed into friendship, understanding, and hope. The ceremony ended with the official presentation of the support group they had created. Friends Without Barriers would become a permanent organization, supported by the military base, the school, and families, dedicated to promoting inclusion and combating bullying throughout the region. In the months that followed, the four friends continued working together on the project. Tyler became the group's president, using his leadership skills to mobilize resources and support. Brandon developed a conflict resolution training program for students and teachers. Noah organized monthly awareness events about the rights of people with disabilities. Ethan became the primary mentor, helping other young people facing situations similar to those he had experienced. The story of the four boys' transformation spread across the region. Other schools began requesting visits and presentations from the group. Local media covered their activities. Universities invited them to participate in research on bullying and inclusion. A year after the school incident, Sarah was invited to receive an honorary commendation from the State Department of Education for an initiative that had transformed not only individual lives but an entire community. In her acceptance speech, she said, "This honor isn't mine. It belongs to a brave boy who chose forgiveness over revenge, understanding over anger. It belongs to 3 young men who had the humility to admit their mistakes and the determination to change. It belongs to families who decided to support their children on this journey of growth. It belongs to an entire community that chose to believe in the possibility of transformation." Ethan, now 15, had become a reference in disability rights advocacy. His grades remained excellent, and he had been accepted into a special program for gifted students at a federal university. His plan was to study special education and psychology, then open a truly inclusive school. Tyler, completely transformed, had become a student leader and school council president. His leadership qualities, now channeled positively, made him someone who inspired and motivated other young people. He planned to study law, following in his father's footsteps, but with a focus on human rights and social advocacy. Brandon discovered a surprising passion for psychology and mediation. He had started taking extracurricular courses on conflict resolution and planned to specialize in school psychology. His dream was to work in schools, helping prevent situations like the one he had gone through. Noah proved to be a natural organizer and passionate activist. He had earned a scholarship to a technical school where he studied business administration and communications. His goal was to work for non-governmental organizations focused on inclusion and social rights. 2 years after the start of this story, the four friends organized the first Regional Youth Inclusion Summit, which brought together over 200 participants from 12 cities. The event included lectures, workshops, hands-on activities, and the launch of a statewide anti-bullying campaign. During the event, they presented a documentary they had produced about their own journey of transformation. The film showed everything from the day of the school intervention to their current projects, including interviews with families, teachers, and the young people themselves who had benefited from Friends Without Barriers. The documentary ended with a collective message from the four friends. Change is possible. Forgiveness is possible. True friendship is possible. No matter how dark the situation may seem, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes that light comes in the form of people willing to show us a better path. Other times we can be that light for others. The important thing is never to give up on the possibility of becoming better people. The audience rose in a prolonged standing ovation. There were tears, smiles, and hope. What had begun as a story of pain and conflict had transformed into a source of inspiration for hundreds. Principal Johnson, now 65 and about to retire, was called to the stage to receive a special tribute. She had become one of the leading advocates for inclusive education in the region, completely transforming her approach after the events of that memorable day. 2 years ago, I was a principal who thought bullying was normal, something that would resolve itself, she said, her voice trembling. It took me nearly 20 years to learn a lesson these 4 young people taught me in just a few months, that real education isn't just about passing on knowledge, it's about shaping empathetic, fair, and courageous individuals. Colonel Sarah Miller, promoted to general a year earlier, was the last to speak. When I made the decision to bring those armored vehicles to the school, I was acting as a desperate mother. I never imagined that moment would become the start of such a profound transformation. Now I understand that sometimes dramatic actions are needed to draw attention to problems society prefers to ignore. But what truly changed everything wasn't the armored vehicles. It was the courage of one boy to forgive those who hurt him, the humility of 3 young men to admit their mistakes, and the love of families willing to support their children through growth. It was an entire community choosing to believe in the possibility of change. Today, when I look at these 4 young people, I see the future of our country. I see leaders who understand that true strength doesn't come from dominating others, but from lifting them up. I see people who know that differences aren't obstacles, but opportunities to learn and grow. The event ended with the announcement that the program developed at the military base would be expanded statewide, with support from the government and private organizations. The intervention model that had started with a desperate mother and 7 armored vehicles had become public policy. 3 years after the original incident, Ethan enrolled in a federal university with a full scholarship to study psychology and special education. In his application essay, he wrote, "My greatest qualification isn't just my high grades or my community projects. It's the fact that I've experienced both the cruelty and kindness of humanity firsthand, and I've chosen to dedicate my life to promoting the latter." Tyler was accepted into one of the country's top law schools, also with a full scholarship. In his admissions interview, he explained, "A few years ago, I was someone who used privilege and power to hurt the vulnerable. Today, I want to use that same privilege and power to defend them. I've learned that our worst moments can become our greatest motivation to do good." Brandon began studying psychology at a federal university, specializing in conflict mediation and resolution. His thesis would focus on transforming bullies into advocates, a study on rehabilitation programs for youth who engage in bullying. Noah enrolled in a business administration program with a focus on non-profit organizations. His dream was to professionalize and expand the work he'd started as a teenager, creating a national network of support groups for people with disabilities. On the 5th anniversary of Armored Vehicles Day, as the school intervention came to be known, the 4 friends organized a special celebration. The event took place in the very same school courtyard where it all began, now renamed the Reconciliation Courtyard. A commemorative plaque was installed at the site, bearing the words, "On this spot, on date, 4 young men learned that true strength comes from compassion, that true courage lies in forgiveness, and that true victory is turning enemies into friends. May this plaque inspire future generations to choose kindness over cruelty, unity over division, and hope over despair." During the celebration, hundreds of people gathered to hear speeches, participate in inclusive activities, and celebrate the progress made in the fight against bullying. Attendees included people with disabilities, family members, educators, psychologists, activists, and community leaders from across the region. The highlight of the event came when the 4 friends, now young adults, took the stage for a special presentation. They had prepared a theatrical performance reenacting their own story, from their first hostile encounter to their current friendship. The play was interspersed with real testimonies from people who had benefited from the group's work over the years. Parents of children with disabilities who had found support and guidance, young people who had overcome bullying, educators who had implemented new inclusion programs. Amy Williams, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome who had been one of the first beneficiaries of the Friends Without Barriers group, stepped onto the stage to share a heartfelt testimony. "When my parents first brought me here, I was very shy and afraid to make friends. The people from Friends Without Barriers taught me that being different doesn't mean being less. Today I have many friends. I'm part of the school choir, and I'm no longer afraid to be myself. Joseph Charles, a 16-year-old who had been a victim of homophobic bullying and found support in the group, also shared his experience. 2 years ago, I thought about dropping out of school because I couldn't take the teasing anymore. The Friends Without Barriers team didn't just give me emotional support. They worked with my school to create a more inclusive environment. Now, I'm an inclusion mentor for my class, helping other kids who go through similar struggles. The most emotional moment of the evening came when Mrs. Mary, a 70-year-old grandmother of a child with autism, approached the microphone. "My grandsons, Tyler, Brandon, Noah, and Ethan," she said affectionately, referring to the 4 friends. "You have no idea how many families you've touched with your work. My little granddaughter Sophie has autism and was always rejected by other kids. After you started working at her school, everything changed. Now she has friends, joins in all the activities, and is happy. But you didn't just change Sophie's life. You changed mine too. You taught me that having a special grandchild isn't a burden, it's a blessing. You gave me the courage to fight for her rights and for other children like her." Mrs. Mary's words echoed the feelings of hundreds of families who had been impacted by the group's work over the years. At the end of the celebration, the 4 friends embraced once more, just as they had so many times before. "Can you believe all this started with a fight in the school courtyard?" Tyler asked, laughing. "It wasn't a fight," Ethan corrected. "It was the beginning of our friendship. We just didn't know it yet." "Imagine where we'll be 5 years from now," Brandon said. "It doesn't matter where we are," Noah replied. "What matters is that we'll still be together, still making a difference. Always together." The other 3 agreed in unison. End of story. Now, tell me what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave a heartfelt comment below. Do you believe the transformation of these boys was possible? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.